It's been over 6 months since the Palisades and Eaton Fires tore through Pacific Palisades and Altadena respectively. The fires destroyed more than 18,000 homes, killed at least 30 people, and made the Palisades and Eaton Fires the second and third most destructive wildfires in California history. As many of you guys know, I was there on the ground documenting it all. But what has since come of these fires is a myriad of lawsuits, theories, and arguments about why these fires, specifically the Palisades fire, could have been contained. Today, we're going to take a look at some of these argumentative papers and explain why the Palisades fire behaved so aggressively, why it made it so hard to contain even without those 100-mile-per-hour winds, and why the destruction of Pacific Palisades was written in the cards well before this fire even happened. First things first, I want to acknowledge and say that my heart goes out to everyone who lost everything during this fire. My family's experienced similar stuff in the 2018 Camp Fire in Paradise and also the Carr Fire too in Redding that same year. So I know exactly how angry, disappointed, and frustrated all you guys are as well. In no way are your feelings unjust or unsupported. I believe that it is crucial that in order to move on from these fires, we need to work through a lot of these emotions that come after such a traumatic experience like the fires in Southern California. Secondly, I want to say that I am in no way affiliated with CAL FIRE, the LAFD, or any other official or government agency that responded to this fire in any shape or form. I am a pyrogeographer with a degree in physical and environmental geography, and I have been independently documenting California wildfires since the summer of 2022. My only agenda is to help educate people on the complexities of wildfire in a truthful, unbiased manner. Early in my coursework, I thought I had a general idea of wildfire and its mechanisms, but once I worked in my upper-level collegiate classes, along with my growing experience within the fire lines, it was only then that I realized how many factors go into a wildfire. Wildfire just isn't a black and white topic. It's not a thing where if A happens, then B could have happened, or if A happened, then B shouldn't have happened. To truly be an expert in this topic, one would need years of study, which is why I never really posted this video or any sort of video like this prior in my years of covering wildfires, because I just didn't have the knowledge base that I do now. Some of my followers have kind of sent me this independent study that was produced by a technology and entertainment industry professional that looked at various data sets from local weather stations, drought, and climatological factors, and a host of other analytical data kind of right within the first 6 hours of the fire. The main point in one of these articles is that the wind speeds were below the hurricane strength threshold that had been in the forecast from NWS Los Angeles. Therefore, the fire wasn't experiencing extreme conditions, and that this fire could have been contained within the first few hours since igniting. The author then shows various weather stations showing these wind speeds were not meeting red flag warning conditions. Now, first and foremost, this report by the author completely omits two major factors in how a wildfire moves in the landscape, and that is fuels and topography. These two factors, along with weather, make up what is called the fire behavior triangle. Fuels, such as the fuel type, the amount of fuel available, and the moisture content of that fuel, can greatly influence how a fire moves through the landscape and at what sort of intensity. Topography, such as slope, elevation, or aspect, also drives how fire interacts with the landscape. The Palisades fire burned through a chaparral-dominated ecosystem. These chaparral ecosystems have evolved to burn and are dependent on fire for reproduction. Ceanothus, a type of shrub, will only have its seeds germinate if a certain temperature threshold is met, and it's met through, you guessed it, fire. Chaparral ecosystems typically see stand replacing fire, where nothing is left after. This means that a natural fire in this ecosystem will be fully consuming. This fully consuming fire has made it difficult to determine the natural fire return interval for these areas because of this fully consuming fire regime. Typically, we can predict that a fire will naturally return to a chaparral ecosystem every 15 to 100 years. But there have been instances where fires have returned to these ecosystems in as little as 5 years, or well beyond the 100-year threshold, even without fire suppression. These sorts of fully consuming brush fires are really conducive to extreme wildland fire behavior and long-range spotting, which we saw both in the Palisades and Eaton fires, for a multitude of reasons. Number one, the usual topography of the landscape in Southern California is rugged hills and mountains with steep, fuel-heavy slopes. These hill and mountain drainages are prone to rapid slope-driven runs with rollout to adjacent slopes, even without a significant Santa Ana wind event. If we add in any sort of wind, this would drive the fire even more rapidly through this landscape. The alignment of these drainages also plays a factor, as they can funnel winds and create updrafts within the plume, which can deposit burning embers at least a quarter mile to half a mile away from the main flaming front. Number 2, these chaparral ecosystems are naturally dense from our wet winters and will dry out in the seasonal heat of a California summer. This dense fuel loading will allow fire to run through a chaparral ecosystem with ease, and, if combined with favorable slope, the fire will preheat the fuels ahead of the main flaming front and deprive whatever moisture was left in these stands. Lastly, this chaparral is more conducive to extreme fire behavior than other landscapes because of its natural survival mechanisms, such as having oily surfaces to help protect against total moisture loss, which is crucial for an environment that is naturally hot and dry. This oil, like any sort of oil, is highly flammable. This brush will also grow more vertically than horizontally to protect itself against excessive exposure to the sun. This vertical growth would allow fire to have significantly higher flame heights than other vegetation, such as grass or low-lying shrubs found at higher elevations. So, if we combine a naturally oily tall shrub in an environment that is hot and dry in the summer, we will see fire rapidly spread in the landscape, even in the absence of wind on steep slopes. And with the Palisades fire and the terrain it ignited in, any amount of wind that affected the fire would greatly increase fire behavior, which was well documented on the Alert California wildfire cams during the first hour of the fire. This independent report stated that, quote, during the critical period of potential containment from 10:30 a.m. to 4 p.m., when CAL FIRE reported the fire expanding from 10 to 200 acres, weather conditions remained manageable. The highest sustained wind speed was 35.7 miles per hour in Malibu, with the highest gusting reaching 44 miles per hour in the Santa Monica Mountains. For context, hurricane-force winds began at 74 miles per hour, with Category 1 hurricanes ranging from 74 to 95. The recorded winds on January 7th were well below this threshold, and do not support false claims that the fire spread under hurricane-strength conditions or that it was unmanageable due to record-breaking wind speeds." End quote. The author then concludes that none of the weather factors, including 9 months without any measurable rainfall in the region, influenced the fire was extreme in nature, and that this fire could have been contained. Now, first and foremost, yeah, he is right about one thing. The winds that were recorded during the first part of the fire were not reaching hurricane force strength at the time, and that's just because the National Weather Service and many other meteorologists predicted that these peak winds would be coming later in the afternoon and evening. But the winds that he stated from these weather stations, where winds were sustained from 35 and gusted to 44, will still greatly affect the fire in terms of its forward speed and the potential for extreme long-range spotting. This Alert wildfire cam footage shows the fire around 15 minutes after the first reports of a vegetation fire came in. So the timestamp down here on the bottom right is for 10:46 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Just from how this looks, we are already seeing signs of rapid growth for this fire. Visible torching in this drainage with flame heights exceeding at least 50 feet, dark smoke showing heavy fuels are being consumed rapidly, and the column of smoke is bent at a 45-degree angle, showing that winds are affecting the fire area. If winds were not a factor in this fire's growth, the column would be more upright, such as this smoke column that I documented from the 2024 Park Fire. Now, if we play through the video, and we stop it a little over 20 minutes later at 11:08 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the fire has already progressed down drainage from the top of the slope to the hills near this neighborhood. So this fire isn't moving upslope as a typical fire does in this landscape. It was, in fact, the wind that was driving this fire so rapidly downslope into highly populated areas. If we take the 35 mile per hour sustained winds in the area, as mentioned by the self-study, and apply it to fire spread, that means that the flaming front speed is about 3 to 4 miles per hour. During these 20 minutes of video footage, the flaming front has easily moved at least 1/2 to 1 mile downslope. If we average this growth over a full hour, it would equate to around 3 to 4 miles per hour. But this isn't accounting for the spot fires that were igniting well in front of the main flaming front and quickly becoming established fires that also had the same wind on them. These new fingers of fire would then rapidly grow like the main flaming front and would themselves produce significant ember casting because of the chaparral environment it's burning through. To show this long-range spotting and rapid growth, let's play this video again and pause it 3 minutes later at 11:11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The smoke briefly lets up at this part of the fire area so we can see what the landscape looks like right now. And if we zoom in, there's a spot fire visible with flame at least a quarter mile away from the main flaming front. And if we pause the video again at 11:13 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, this spot fire has already grown significantly and is well established. And then we lose visual of the spot fire as the column leans over significantly once again. Another example is this image from the LA County Fire Department's Heli-based 69 Alert California cam. This image was taken at 10:48 Pacific Standard Time, and we can see the head of the fire as evidenced by the flames visible on the cams. The smoke plume is also entirely visible, and you can see through it because it's vented out at the right side of the page. This next image is of the same Alert California cam at 11:28 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is 40 minutes between each image. The head of the fire has progressed rapidly to the west, while the smoke plume's venting area is completely out of frame, even when the camera had to zoom out to better capture the footprint of the fire. Now, as many know, I've been a volunteer wildfire reporter for the Watch Duty app since we launched statewide back in California in 2022. And our team, as many know, was on this fire since the beginning. At 10:50 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we pushed out the first report on conditions made on the fire by an aerial resource, which was from a helicopter. The copter reported that the fire was approximately 10 acres in heavy fuel, was aligned with the wind, and had a potential for 200 acres in 20 minutes. They also reported that structures were immediately threatened. At 11:04 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we pushed out another report from radio traffic that indicated resources were already engaging in structure protection, and the fire would impact structures in the Floresta Place area. There were reports from ground units that significant spotting was occurring as well, with spot fires being reported from a half mile to 3/4 of a mile in front of the main fire. This report lines up with the camera footage showing the rapid growth and long-range spotting that we discussed earlier. At 11:29 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we reported that, per radio traffic, the fire was estimated at approximately 200 acres and was bumping the area of Chastain Parkway East and Cali Brittany. I'm really sorry if I butchered that name. I'm not from the area, so please cut me some slack on that. This fire wasn't the main head of the fire, but rather was a flanking fire after the head of the fire passed the area just to the east. Between 1:30 p.m. and 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, the fire was mapped at 771 acres by Fire's Intel Ship 12. At 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, the fire was mapped again by Firis at 1,261.5 acres, an increase of about 490 acres in about 1 to 2 hours. At this time, I had arrived at the fire area traveling west on Sunset Boulevard from the east, and I took my first video of the fire area at 3:21 p.m. in Temescal Canyon, upslope from my position at the top of Monument Street. At 3:31, I observed and documented extreme fire behavior in the form of a rotating column about 1 mile from my position. And at 3:56 p.m., the fire had spread across the drainage, became established, and impacted the homes adjacent to the canyon on Monument Street. And from then on until I left the fire area to head to Altadena for the Eaton fire, it truly felt like hell on earth. Like, it honestly felt like the apocalypse had come. It was that crazy. Now, what about aerial resources? Why didn't fire retardant stop this fire, or watercopter drops work, in taking some heat from the flames? First and foremost, aerial resources cannot safely operate when a wildfire smoke column is bent at 45 degrees, which masks the flaming front. The lack of visibility forces any sort of aerial resource to make drops at other parts of the fire, such as at the heel or flanks, where there is more visibility that allows pilots to safely operate without significant risk of crashing. Secondly, fire retardant doesn't fully stop a fire's advance in heavy fuels. It acts to slow it up to give time for ground resources. So, even if the smoke column of the Palisades fire did allow for retardant missions across the head of the fire, the fuel that this fire was burning in would easily chew through any sort of retardant line made by aircraft. Retardant is very useful for lighter fuels such as grass because grass will burn rapidly, but can easily be stopped once the forward spread is checked by fire retardant. For heavier fuels like timber and chaparral, the fuels are burning longer, hotter, and have higher flame heights, which is conducive to spot fires from embers getting lofted in the plume. So even if you have a retardant line that is doubled and tripled up, the fire can still slowly burn through the retardant when aerial resources are grounded due to night hours, visibility issues, or if a drone incursion occurs. Or it can spot well over the retardant line and just become established across it, and then you're just back to square one. And finally, winds will either make the retardant or water drops completely miss their mark, or they'll just evaporate before they even hit their marks. It's why wind-driven fires and heavy fuels can make aerial firefighting really just ineffective. With all this being said, the only way that the Palisades fire could have even been contained in these conditions was if it had met a full wildland response probably within the first 5 minutes of its ignition. That means Type 3 wildland engines would have to directly attack the fire in less than 5 minutes since it started. It would mean a full load of fixed-wing aircraft dropping retardant over the fire in less than 5 minutes since it started. And it would mean rotor wing dropping water in less than 5 minutes since it started. And with where the fire approximately started, there's just no logical way in which this sort of aggressive initial attack could have occurred in that short of a time frame. Now you may be wondering, why weren't there firefighters in my area? Why weren't they doing what they do and protecting my home? Well, there's a lot to unpack with this one, and it starts with something called the Wildland-Urban Interface. Now, the Wildland-Urban Interface, or WUI, is the zone of transition between unoccupied land and human development. Basically, it's where human development, such as homes, apartments, and other buildings, meet or intermix with undeveloped wildland or vegetative fuels. There are two types of WUIs. The first is an interface, where high-density development is next to undeveloped wildland. The population in these areas is greater than or equal to 250 people per square mile, and human structures are directly next to wildland. The other form is called an intermix, where areas between lower density housing and adjacent undeveloped wildland are. In these regions, the population density is between 28 and 250 people per square mile. Physical structures are spread throughout an area of wildland. Pacific Palisades is an interface area, but to an extreme. And these WUI communities, like Pacific Palisades, have really high potential for devastating urban conflagrations. And here's why. First, as mentioned earlier, there is the proximity to wildland fuels. Wildland fuels in WUI communities tend to be directly abutting homes, especially in Southern California. This poses a plethora of problems if a wildfire were to occur in proximity to a WUI community. The lack of fuel breaks allows the fire to continuously spread directly into neighborhoods, which means firefighters would have no way of establishing what's called an anchor point. An anchor point is an advantageous location, usually a barrier to fire spread, from which to start building a fire line. To name a few examples of what a good anchor point could be, it can be an open road abutting the wildland with no structures directly between the road and the fire, a completed hand or dozer line that ties into a road, or any open space free of wildland fuels called a fuel break. Now, if firefighters were to try and fight the fire without an anchor point, they'd be violating Wildland Fire Watchout number 8, constructing line without safe anchor point. These watchouts, which are 18 in total, describe situations that expand the 10 standard firefighting orders with the intent that if firefighters follow the standard firefighting orders and are alerted to the 18 watchout situations, much of the risk of firefighting can be reduced. Remember this, as I'll be mentioning additional watchout situations as we kind of continue on with this segment. Because of this continuous fuel loading, which led directly to Pacific Palisades and Altadena, it allowed the fires to rapidly spread into neighborhoods before people could evacuate safely. This leads to the next major factor of why WUI fires are so devastating and deadly, which is that many neighborhoods in WUI communities are densely packed with homes. Dense neighborhoods with little separation space and heavy ornamental vegetation between homes offers the fire a continuous fuel load to advance. So really, to kind of put it into perspective, these dense, tightly packed neighborhoods just essentially become another fuel type for this wildfire to burn through. The radiant heat and embers from each burning home will then ignite the next home abutting it. And then this sequence of events continues until firefighters can stop all the ember casting occurring, or if the fire just has no more fuel to consume. And finally, because of this high density housing in an area prone to burn, when a wildfire does occur, it will force thousands of people to evacuate the area all at once. And these streets and roads cannot handle a mass evacuation, which causes mass evacuation traffic. We saw this in Pacific Palisades, and if we want to look at a historic fire that saw a similar situation with evacuation traffic, the 2018 Camp Fire that burned Paradise is a prime example. Many of the neighborhoods in Pacific Palisades had just one way in and one way out, like Paradise. A significant proportion of fatalities does occur in wildfire evacuation traffic, as we saw in Paradise too. This is because the fire can outpace and outspeed evacuation traffic, and if we have a major thoroughfare such as Sunset Boulevard become gridlocked, the fire can burn over these evacuating citizens, forcing them to abandon their cars and run on foot. We saw similar scenes in the 1991 Oakland Hills firestorm, another deadly WUI fire, where firefighters told residents that they had to evacuate on foot because of the traffic jams leaving neighborhoods. All of this happening in Pacific Palisades forced firefighters, who could have been trying to establish anchor points to defend homes, to focus their efforts on life safety and getting people out of harm's way. The gridlock traffic would slow fire trucks getting from point A to point B, and because the fire had started close to and rapidly progressed into highly populated areas, any sort of structure protection efforts would have to transition from structure defense to life safety measures, where the primary focus was to just safely evacuate people out of harm's way. This is a reason why structure protection measures weren't prioritized as much during the first 6 hours of the fire. Even if this evacuation traffic weren't an issue and people were safely out of the way, the fire behavior itself would have been extremely dangerous for firefighters to be directly in front of the main flaming front approaching the edges of Pacific Palisades. This sort of frontal assault would violate Watchout Number 10, which is attempting frontal assault on fire. Another topic that has been publicly shared through a lawsuit from Spencer Pratt, a reality TV star, and others, is the blame on the city and the utilities' operation of its water supply and related infrastructure for causing damage to their properties. But the problem is the belief that has been circulated everywhere that if the fire hydrants and reservoirs were full and never ran out, then this fire could have been stopped. Now the reality is that the Santa Ynez Reservoir, which could hold 117 million gallons of water, had been under repair since early 2024 and had been offline since then because the water faced contamination issues. It was not emptied just before the fire. As for the hydrant problems, a typical fire hydrant in your neighborhood isn't designed to stop a firestorm with hundreds, if not thousands, of homes burning all at once, much less a wildfire burning at a critical rate of spread with long-range spotting. If a single home is completely engulfed in flames, firefighters typically use over 3,000 gallons of water for the suppression efforts. Now let's multiply that number by 10 homes burning or about to be burned in a neighborhood. That would be a minimum of at least 30,000 gallons of water just for that one small area. So you can imagine what fighting an urban conflagration where whole city blocks are being burned at a time can do to the water supply. And that doesn't take into account the actual fire engines needing water to run mobile attack adjacent to wildland fuels, water tenders taking water to run to all different parts of the fire to refill these engines, the copters dipping from water sources to make aerial drops, or just a bunch of people leaving their hoses and sprinkler systems running for their home. But let's say if there was enough water, would it have made a difference for a fire that rapidly entered highly populated areas and began spot fires? Remember, this fire had fingers. It wasn't just one main flaming front that entered into Pacific Palisades. If a home ignited a half-mile away from where firefighters were actively engaging in structure protection, then resources would need to be pulled for that new fire. Now this is just a personal anecdote, but I remember being at the top of Pacific Palisades on Monument Street, and right when the fire hit, that was obviously crazy, but 15 minutes after that, I was looking around everywhere in areas to my west where I thought I was safe, and I was seeing homes burning and spot fires at least a half-mile away from my location, and that one was really an eye-opening experience for me. That home's radiant heat and ember casting would ignite the next home, and then those embers would start another structure fire half a block away, and this continues on for hours. Not to mention the fact that some people believe this water can stop a 100-foot wall of flames in steep terrain, which isn't the reality of just how wildland firefighting works. The water would simply evaporate because of just how hot the fire is in general. Let me tell you, the radiant heat from brush or trees being fully consumed or multiple burning buildings all at the same time is just so intense, and really unless you've experienced this out on the lines yourself firsthand, it's really hard to properly imagine this from home. Factor in the need for continued evacuations and increasing winds throughout the day. Unless you had half of Southern California's firefighting forces pre-positioned exactly in Pacific Palisades or right where the fire ignited, the task of containing this fire was practically impossible. Now look, it's easy to look in hindsight and claim that it was completely irresponsible to not pre-position more fire engines in Pacific Palisades. But if they had pre-positioned and moved all their extra fire engines over there, it would have meant ignoring other high-risk fire zones in the area, along with just regular fire calls needed in an extremely large population area, where a lot is just happening in general. We also need to remember this fire happened in January. Agencies won't be fully staffed like they are during the summers when seasonal hires are on call. Winter is a time for fire engines and aircraft in need of crucial rehab after the long fire season, which could easily factor into why resources were not prepared already. Again, I just want to make it known, I'm in no way, shape, or form with any sort of fire agency. You can look me up on this online, wherever you want. I'm just simply stating what happens every single off-season for wildland firefighters. Now, with everything said, I'm going to lead off my next segment with what I said in an interview I did with CNN International at 1:40 a.m. during the first night of the fires in my hotel room up in Castaic, still in shock from what I saw.
Evacuation orders sooner to avoid the gridlock that you ended up with. And they are now learning from that, it seems, because we're being told that Malibu residents are being urged to leave before they issue orders there.
Unfortunately, I think this fire, as many fires have recently happened in California, they just move too fast. And emergency authorities, they're just so overwhelmed that really um, it devolves into chaos. And it's really, unfortunately, not. I wouldn't call it on the authorities' fault, but really it's a matter of why are we building a neighborhood that's right into the wildland urban interface, which is where the wildland vegetation meets human development. And especially with only one way in, one way out, that's unfortunately kind of one of the biggest causes for these issues with traffic. Plain and simple, this destruction in Pacific Palisades could have easily been prevented before we even thought about a Palisades fire. And here's how. We know the history of fire in the Santa Monica Mountains. Since 1900, where records began, there have been numerous large wildfires that have occurred in the vicinity of Pacific Palisades throughout the Santa Monica Mountains. Some historical fires burn in areas that would have been homes today in Pacific Palisades, such as the 1938 Topanga No. 50 fire, or the 1978 Mandeville, LA City fire that did destroy hundreds of homes and killed 3 people. Further to the east, the 1961 Bel Air firestorm destroyed over 400 homes and injured 200 firefighters. The LAFD produced a documentary the following year called Design for Disaster. It called the densely packed homes nestled on hillsides covered in dry brush, quote, a serious problem in fire protection even under the best of conditions, end quote. I really recommend watching this documentary, which is available for free on YouTube. It's really a chilling watch because of its similarities to the Palisades fire. A rapidly spreading wildfire directly into neighborhoods, traffic congestion from evacuating civilians and firefighters, and water systems going out during the fire, among many other topics. So if we knew about the fire history in the Santa Monica Mountains, we knew about the Bel Air fire, we knew even back then that building densely packed houses on canyons with just one way in and one way out was bad. Why the heck did the city build deeper into the wildland urban interface? As we discussed earlier, the dangers of continuing to build deep into the WUI as a way to manage population growth will always be an issue, no matter what time we're in or where this is occurring. The North Village development, which is north of Sunset Boulevard between Temescal Canyon and Rustic Canyon in Pacific Palisades, highlights this perfect storm of conditions that were met for an urban conflagration. Many of these homes were built in the 1950s and 60s and are densely packed in without any sort of spacing between them. At the northern end of the village, along Monument Street, the first line of homes is on top of a small canyon with no buffer zone between wildland fields and the homes. This, combined with little to no defensible space and narrow streets, was truly a design for disaster. These sorts of fires have happened in the past. It was predicted for the future, yet the human beings who were in charge during this time still never did enough to combat the poor planning and building that occurred. The humans of today, both public officials but also homeowners themselves, have not done enough in enforcing and educating themselves on defensible space and home hardening practices. Simply put, we know that home hardening measures such as closing open vents with 1/16" to 1/8" non-combustible corrosion-resistant metal mesh screens, closing gutters to prevent both embers and combustible materials from entering the gutter system, and not having exposed eaves significantly reduces the likelihood of your home burning in a wildfire. We know defensible space, like keeping ornamental vegetation at least 2 to 5 feet away from the home, moving any flammable material away from the wall exteriors, and not planting fire hazardous plants and trees like eucalyptus, pine trees, bamboo, and palm trees will all significantly reduce the likelihood of your home burning. All we need to do is stop the blaming and social media arguing, unplug ourselves, and get out there and work together on fire mitigation solutions that we know work in real-life wildfire scenarios. This beneficial work is already happening in Butte County, California, where I live. In 2024, the Park Fire burned through Cohasset, California, a low-income, unincorporated town about 15 minutes north of Chico in the Sierra foothills. I was there documenting the fire's first initial advance on July 24, 2024. The fire started just 5 minutes from where I live in Chico, and this is what I saw just below Cohasset that first evening. That's the sound of a very dangerous wildfire. Oh my god. Oh my gosh. Wow. This is extremely dangerous, guys. Sounds like a freight train. Fire across Cohasset Ridge. Well established. Well established. It's well established across the ridge right now. Look at that. Look at that right now. This is not good. This is not good. This was intense fire behavior thanks to heavy fuel loading, topography favorable to the fire, and southwest winds gusting at 25 miles per hour. This was happening on a day when no red flag warnings were issued, because the forecasted weather conditions just didn't warrant it. I thought Cohasset was destroyed, or I would just see significant destruction, and I was so worried for all the people that I knew living in that area at the time. But I was just so wrong. And it was all thanks to one private landowner. 605 structures survived and were protected because of the mitigation work done at Maple Creek Ranch. Over the last 5 to 10 years, the Butte Prescribed Burn Association, the Butte Fire Safe Council, volunteers from the community, and private landowners have worked on biomass removal, mastication, and yearly prescribed fire to return the land to its more natural look instead of a thick, dense, mixed forest. When the park fire reached Maple Creek Ranch, its rate of spread slowed significantly, and the fire, which was running through the crown or canopy of the trees, immediately moved to the ground and reduced in intensity. Firefighters were able to establish an anchor point at Maple Creek Ranch, which allowed them to safely fight the fire, which is why we have an island of green here in Butte County, and it was all thanks to a community effort to protect and mitigate the threat of devastating fire. The Butte Fire Safe Council has a great video that goes deeper into this project and how Cohasset was saved, and I will link it in the description for you to watch. I highly recommend it. In conclusion, was the Palisades fire containable during the first 6 hours of it igniting? No, it wasn't. Will more fires like Palisades and Eaton happen to more WUI communities? Unfortunately, yes. Was this fire unprecedented? No, it really wasn't. Can we protect communities from future conflagrations? Absolutely. And it begins with community partnerships and involvement. Thank you guys for the time and attention to this educational video, and I'll see y'all later.